It started with a single siren in the dead of night, then another, and another. When I first heard rumors that our TAN president had assembled a fake police force, K-9 units and all, I thought it was just another conspiracy theory. But then, masked officers began patrolling our streets, dragging people from their homes under the guise of law enforcement. That's when I knew, this was real. And it was dangerous. I had to act fast. But nothing could have prepared me for what came next. My own father, the chief of police, uncovered a tangled web of corruption so deep that it threatened to tear our entire community apart. Welcome to my channel. This is the truth they don't want you to hear. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. The bright orange paper fluttering on my front door, stopping me cold, after a grueling 12-hour shift at the hospital. All I wanted was to surprise Sarah by helping her with her new vegetable garden. But the moment I saw "immediate action required" stamped in bold black letters, my exhaustion vanished. My hands tightened around the notice as I read it. I'd heard the stories about Barbara Thompson, our self-appointed TAN president. She had moved in barely 6 months ago and somehow maneuvered her way into power within weeks. The way she pressed the pen against the paper, nearly tearing through it as she wrote our address, told me everything I needed to know about her personality. Unauthorized landscaping modifications detected in the backyard space. The notice read, "Immediate removal required. All garden installations must undergo proper TAN review process." At the bottom, Barbara's signature sprawled across the page like a royal decree. But it was the last line that made my stomach knot. Security will conduct regular inspections to ensure compliance. Since when did vegetable gardens require security patrols? Sarah and I had only lived here for 3 months. Drawn in by the quiet streets and friendly neighbors, Mrs. Patterson next door had even brought us homemade cookies to welcome us. And now this? I pulled out my phone and snapped photos of the notice. The wording felt off. Too official, too forceful, as if it was trying to convince me of its legitimacy. Growing up as the son of a police chief, I'd learned early, document everything. Authority, real or fake, always left a paper trail. Inside, I found Sarah humming in the kitchen, fingers still dusted with soil from the garden. Her smile faded when I handed her the notice. "But we checked the TAN guidelines," she said, already pulling up the community website on her tablet. "Here, Article 7, vegetable gardens are permitted in backyard spaces if they have proper drainage." I watched as she highlighted the section, her environmental lawyer instincts kicking in. We did everything by the book, installed proper drainage, kept it neat, even used the recommended height for raised beds. She glanced outside. You can barely see the tomatoes from the street. The doorbell rang, sharp and impatient, both of us startled. Through the peephole, Barbara. She stood on our welcome mat in a crisp white pantsuit, gripping a tablet like it was a weapon. The second I opened the door, she cut to the chase. "I want to make sure you received my notice," she said, her gaze flicking over my shoulder, as if trying to peer inside. "The board has received multiple complaints about your agricultural activities." I kept my face neutral. "Would you mind showing me those complaints?" I asked, keeping my tone even, remembering my dad's advice about dealing with power-hungry bureaucrats. "And can you clarify which specific TAN guidelines we violated?" Barbara's jaw tightened. "Our new security team will be documenting all violations starting tomorrow," she said instead. "I suggest you comply quickly to avoid complications." Then she turned on her heel, but not before I caught a glimpse of something odd. A logo, embossed on the back of her tablet case. It looked suspiciously like a police badge. I shut the door. Sarah was already pulling up property records and local ordinances. "Look at this," she whispered, pointing to a section of the last TAN board meeting minutes. "They never voted on hiring a security team. Where is she getting this authority?" I turned to the kitchen window, staring out at the neat rows of vegetables Sarah had planted. Something bigger was happening here. That orange notice was just the beginning. The first time I saw them was the next morning. I was sipping my coffee, still groggy, when movement outside caught my attention. 2 men, dressed in black polo shirts with "TAN Security" printed on the back. Standing in our yard, one held a clipboard, jotting something down, while the other snapped photos of our tomato plants, as if they were evidence in a crime scene. My stomach tightened. Their movements were too calculated, too aggressive. These weren't just neighborhood volunteers enforcing some HOA bylaw. And then I saw it. The tactical belts, not standard issue, not HOA gear. These were loaded with what looked like real police equipment, handcuffs, batons, even what appeared to be a taser. Sarah was still asleep upstairs when I stepped onto the back porch. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the unease curling in my gut. The taller man turned slowly, resting a hand on his taser. His partner kept taking photos of our tomato plants. "We have police authority in this community. the tall one said, flashing a badge so quickly I barely registered it before it vanished. It looked official, but something felt off. We're documenting ongoing violations under TAN Code 47B. His tone was confident, practiced, like someone used to people not questioning him. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Immediately, their demeanor shifted, a flicker of hesitation. They didn't like being on camera. I'd like to see your credentials and proof of this police authority, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'd read the legal rights pamphlet just last week. I knew they had to provide documentation. The shorter one stepped forward, his posture aggressive, but the taller man held him back. Then Barbara Thompson appeared, as if she'd been waiting just off stage. She strode across my lawn. Designer workout gear pristine, her expression smug. Another orange violation notice fluttered in her hand. These officers don't answer to residents, she announced, her voice dripping with condescension. They report directly to the TAN Executive Board. Which means, they report to me. That's when I noticed Mrs. Patel, our neighbor, peeking through her curtains. The second our eyes met, she vanished, but not before I saw the fear in her face. Something about that look made my skin crawl. Later that morning, I sat at the kitchen table, replaying my phone footage. That uneasy feeling in my gut only grew stronger. Details I'd missed in the heat of the moment became glaringly obvious. No name tags, no department insignia, badges that didn't match any local law enforcement design I'd ever seen. Gear that looked real, but something about the positioning was off. During my lunch break, I started digging. Every private security company in this state needed specific licenses, especially if their employees were armed. But when I checked the state database, nothing. The TAN newsletter had vaguely mentioned enhanced security, but gave no company name. No licensing information, nothing that could be verified. Sarah came downstairs just as I was drafting an email to the state licensing board. Why are there men with guns taking pictures of our garden? She asked. Voice tight with worry. I showed her the footage. Her face went pale. Those aren't regular security guards, she whispered. I used to work at a security company. Remember? Their gear is all wrong. We watched through the window as the officers moved down the street, stopping at specific houses, not just any houses. The Rodriguez family, they'd complained about discriminatory noise enforcement. The Smiths, they'd questioned the mysterious security fee on their HOA statement. They weren't patrolling, they were targeting. That evening, I created a private group chat with trusted neighbors. The floodgates opened. The security team had been entering backyards without permission. They'd been taking photos of children playing. They'd even threatened to detain someone for washing their car in their own driveway. I was compiling everything, photos, videos, statements, when my phone buzzed. A text from Barbara. Your continued surveillance of our security team is a violation of TAN policy. Expect enforcement action tomorrow. A direct threat, but she'd made a crucial mistake. She'd confirmed what we suspected. These men weren't real police officers. I looked at Sarah. She was already pulling up state laws on impersonating law enforcement. We need to be really careful, she whispered. If they're willing to pretend to be cops, who knows what else they're willing to do? I stared at the growing pile of evidence on our kitchen table. We'd only scratched the surface of what was really going on in our neighborhood. The next day, 10:42 a.m. My phone buzzed during a crucial work meeting. Sarah. She never called during work hours. A sinking feeling gripped my chest as I stepped out and answered. They're in our backyard, she whispered, her voice trembling. 3 of them. They jumped our fence while I was picking tomatoes. In the background, I heard male voices, angry, demanding. Sarah's breath hitched. Heavy boots thudded against our wooden deck. Ma'am, this is your final warning. Exit the garden now. The voice was trying to sound authoritative. But it wasn't right. Too forced. Too rehearsed. We have authorization to remove you by force. By force. Sarah's voice wavered, but she stood her ground. I'm not leaving my own property, she said, defiant. Show me your real police badges. Or leave now. Silence. Then, a click. Not from a phone. From a weapon. The sharp crackle of a radio sent a chill down my spine. Unit 2. Subject is non-compliant. Requesting K-9 backup at 1242 Maple Drive. They were escalating. Over a vegetable garden. I was already sprinting to my car. My tie flapping wildly in the wind. Sarah, I'm on my way. Don't move. Call 911. These aren't real cops. Through the phone, I heard Barbara Thompson's shrill, self-satisfied voice. Mrs. Williams, your garden is a direct violation of TAN aesthetic guidelines. Section 4.3. My security team has full authority to remove unauthorized plantings and trespassers. Trespassers? Sarah's voice rose in disbelief. I live here, and those tomato plants are in our backyard. I put the phone on speaker as I floored the gas pedal. Breaking every speed limit. Every noise on the other end of the line sent my heart pounding. A click, a weapon being unfastened. Heavy boots crunching against the gravel. Barbara's smug voice rattling off violations like a dictator handing down sentences. "Look what I found," one of the security men sneered. "Hispanic-style peppers. Definitely not approved vegetation. They're jalapenos," Sarah snapped. "Since when do vegetables have ethnic restrictions?" A metallic clink. The garden gate I'd installed last weekend. More boots. More bodies. "Stop touching our property," Sarah yelled. "My husband's already called the real police." Barbara laughed. Cold, condescending. "Honey, we are the police in this community." Her voice oozed satisfaction. "The TAN Charter gives us full authority. Now step aside, or my men will remove you." A dog barked in the distance. A deep, aggressive snarl. They were actually bringing in K-9 units for a vegetable garden dispute? I swerved into another lane, drawing angry honks from passing cars. 5 more minutes. "Sarah, just hold on. This is what happens when you ignore warnings." Barbara continued. "First the unauthorized plants, then the unauthorized garden stakes. And now resisting TAN security. You people need to learn respect for authority." Sarah's breath hitched. "You people?" Her voice was steady but razor sharp. I heard the distinct click of her phone camera. "Please say that again." "Barbara, I'm recording everything." A sharp intake of breath. Scrambling feet. Barbara's voice lost its arrogant edge. "Confiscate that phone," she barked. "It's against TAN policy to record security operations." A struggle. Sarah's scream. The phone clattered to the ground but stayed connected. And then, a low, rumbling growl. Deep, threatening, getting closer. "Barbara Thompson." Sarah's voice rang out, stronger now. "If that dog touches me, you'll be in handcuffs before sunset." I was 2 blocks away when I heard sirens. But they weren't coming from the local police station. A black SUV with K-9 unit markings screeched to a stop in front of our house. The fake police force had just made their final mistake. They were about to meet a real chief of police. TAN's reign ends in 5 patrol cars. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I'd seen power-hungry hoa boards before. But this was something else. As I turned onto our street, I saw the crowd. Neighbors lined the sidewalks, phones raised, recording everything. Barbara's security team had finally gone too far. And now, everyone would see exactly who they really were. My tires screeched into the driveway, and then I saw her. Sarah, backed against our front door. Her gardening gloves still on. Dirt smudged across her cheek. 3 men in tactical gear had formed a half-circle around her. Barbara stood smugly to the side, clipboard in hand, writing furiously. But what made my blood run cold was the German shepherd straining against its leash. Teeth bared. The handler, a kid who looked barely old enough to drink, was struggling to control it. This wasn't a game anymore. This was dangerous. "Step back inside your vehicle, sir," one of the security officers barked, trying to sound official. His hand rested on a police-style duty belt. But I knew real police gear. This wasn't it. Barbara's eyes lit up with smug delight. "Perfect timing. Your wife has been interfering with official TAN security operations." She waved her clipboard like a queen issuing an execution order. "We have documented 17 violations, including aggressive behavior toward our officers." I lifted my phone and started recording. For the first time, Barbara hesitated. "Unauthorized recordings are against TAN guidelines," she snapped. There it was, the crack in her confidence. I kept my voice steady, just like my dad taught me. "Funny thing about those guidelines, I've read them cover to cover. And nowhere does it mention a private police force or K-9 units." The youngest officer shifted uncomfortably. His hand dropped from his belt. Sarah caught my eye. I gave her a slight nod. She'd been recording too. Our security cameras were catching everything, from 3 different angles. "This is your final warning," Barbara declared, but her voice had lost its edge. The German shepherd barked. Sarah flinched. And then I saw it. The dog's vest. Police K-9. A federal offense if they weren't real law enforcement. I could almost hear my dad's voice in my head. "Barbara," I said, calmly pulling up the state police department's website on my phone. "Did you know impersonating law enforcement is a felony? Those uniforms, that dog's vest, those fake badges, each one is a separate charge." The security team exchanged nervous glances. The dog handler's grip tightened on the leash. Barbara's pen froze mid-sentence on her clipboard. "Sarah," I called, keeping my eyes on the fake cops. "Could you grab Dad's card from my wallet? I think he'd be very interested in seeing these gentlemen's law enforcement credentials." That's when Barbara made her final mistake. "Detain them both," she shrieked. Her clipboard clattered to the ground. My hands shook as I typed out a quick text to my dad. Emergency at house. Fake cops. Threatening Sarah with dog. Please help. I kept my phone low, pretending to check my schedule. But then, I heard it. Sirens. Barbara was too busy ranting to notice. But Captain Reynolds, the lead security guy, did. His head snapped up. He knew. The other two shifted nervously. Maybe we should, one of them started. But Barbara whirled on him. Don't you dare back down now. I'm paying you good money to show these people who's in charge. Then, the first real police car rounded the corner. Then another. And another. 5 squad cars. Lights flashing. Barbara's face went sheet white. The German Shepherd whined, tail wagging as a real K-9 officer stepped out. And then, my dad. Chief of police. Full uniform. Badge gleaming. Barbara Thompson, he called out, voice booming. Would you care to explain why you have unauthorized personnel impersonating law enforcement officers on private property? And just like that, TAN's reign was over. The fall of Barbara Thompson. Barbara's face cycled through 5 different emotions in 3 seconds: confusion, recognition, fear, anger, and finally, panic. She looked at me, then at my dad, then back at me, and in that moment, she knew. The pieces had clicked together in her head. Her security team tried to back away, but my dad's officers had already formed a tight perimeter. The German Shepherd, proving it had more sense than its handlers, lay down and rolled over, tail wagging. I can explain everything, Barbara stammered. Dad held up a hand, cutting her off. I'm sure you can, ma'am, and we'll have plenty of time for that, down at the station. His voice was calm, but the weight behind those words made Barbara visibly shudder. He turned to the fake cops. Speaking of which, those badges, they look remarkably similar to official police identification. And that's a federal offense. Gentlemen, one of his officers stepped forward. Sir, mind telling me where you got that department-issued gear? The fake security leader, the same man who had been barking orders minutes ago, remained silent. Sweat gleamed on his forehead. Neighbors peered out of their homes. Some were filming. Barbara's little empire of fear was crumbling. And the whole community was watching it happen. The smug queen falls. The screech of more police sirens filled the street as another patrol car pulled up. Barbara's smirk vanished the second she saw the chief of police emblem on the door. I'll never forget how her self-importance melted into sheer terror. Dad stepped out, his uniform crisp, badge gleaming in the afternoon sun. Even the German Shepherd seemed to recognize a real authority figure had arrived. I'd like to see your security licenses and K-9 certifications, Dad said, voice carrying across the yard. The 3 fake officers exchanged nervous glances. Their tough guy act was crumbling. The handler, still clutching the dog's leash, took an instinctive step backward. Barbara, ever the opportunist, jumped in, waving a folder of papers. We have all the necessary TAN authorization right here, she said, voice pitched higher than usual. Dad took the folder, but instead of opening it, he pulled out his phone and turned the screen toward her. That's funny, he said, because according to state records, there's no licensed security company registered under TAN's name. And that K-9 unit? The closest authorized training facility hasn't certified a private security dog in over 2 years. Barbara's face went ghost white. The fake security leader, a tall man with a buzz cut who had terrorized this neighborhood for months, now couldn't seem to look anyone in the eye. 2 officers flanked him. His hand trembled on the dog's leash. Dad's officer stepped in. Sir, you're wearing department-issued gear. Mind telling us where you got it? The leader said nothing. Sweat trickled down his temple. Then, from across the street, voices. Neighbors were coming forward. The Rodriguez family, the Patels, more residents who had been too afraid to speak, until now. Mrs. Rodriguez was shaking with fury. They threatened to have my kids taken away for playing basketball in our driveway. She spat. Phones were up everywhere, recording everything. Barbara's house of lies was burning down in real time. And we were all watching it happen. Unmasking the real villain. Dad walked over to the security team's car, shining his flashlight through the window. Well, he said, voice deceptively light. What do we have here? The entire crowd fell silent. Inside the car were folders filled with photos. Dozens. Pictures of families in their backyards. Children playing. Residents simply living their lives. I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't just intimidation. They'd been watching us. For how long? Barbara tried to slip away in the commotion. But a young officer blocked her path. Ma'am, he said, voice clipped, impersonating law enforcement officers is a federal crime. And using an unauthorized K-9 unit to threaten civilians? That's going to require some explaining. The fake German Shepherd handler looked down at his dog, which had completely given up its aggressive act. The real K-9 unit arrived. And the difference was obvious. The TAN's so-called police dog wasn't trained at all. It was just a pet, used to scare people. I turned to my dad, heart still pounding. Sarah was already hugging him, whispering, "Thank you." Dad nodded, but his anger was evident. He rifled through more of the photos from the car. His jaw clenched. A news van pulled up at the end of the street. Barbara saw it from the back of the patrol car. And for the first time, she broke down. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were the tears of someone who had finally lost control. Her reign was over. The deeper rot. The next morning, Dad called me into his office. On his desk were stacks of papers. TAN financial records. Fake security contracts. Hundreds of surveillance photos. Every page told a darker story. My stomach twisted as I saw time-stamped logs of our neighbors. Families having dinner. Kids playing. Sarah and I, just standing in our own backyard. They had been tracking us all. "Son," Dad said grimly, sliding a document toward me. It was a bank statement. $115 wired every month to a company called Community Guardian Services. I frowned. The real TAN budget only allows for $2 in security expenses. Where's the rest coming from? We kept digging. The truth was worse than we imagined. Barbara had been charging special assessment fees to families who received violation notices. The Rodriguez family paid $3 in security deposits for throwing a birthday party. The Patels were charged maintenance fees for planting a vegetable garden. And the fake security team? Not one of them had real law enforcement experience. Their leader, Mike Stevens, had been fired from 3 police departments for excessive force. His police dog wasn't trained at all. It was his personal pet, used to terrify homeowners. My phone buzzed. "Sarah, check your email." Attached was a Ring camera video. Barbara's team was caught on tape rifling through Mrs. Patel's mailbox. More neighbors started sending footage. Each new clip made my blood boil. Then, Detective Lisa Martinez burst into the office, waving a document. "Chief, we found their training manual. Inside, handwritten notes in Barbara's own scrawl. Target families who challenge authority. Monitor homes with high violation risk. Script for threatening residents." This was never about security. It was about control. And Barbara? She had done this before. 2 other communities. Both times, she vanished before she could be caught. But this time, she had messed with the wrong family. The truth comes out. The real TAN board members sat in stunned silence. They had trusted Barbara to handle day-to-day operations. They had signed off on her decisions without question. And now, one of them, a woman in her 60s, broke down sobbing. "I signed blank checks," she whispered, her hands trembling. "I let her do this." Outside, as the evening set in, more residents came forward. The fake security team had been demanding cash bribes to overlook violations. They had threatened elderly residents with eviction. They had photographed teenage girls at the community pool. They had followed children walking home from school. Each story was worse than the last. In Dad's office, long past midnight, we sifted through mountains of evidence. And then, we found the final piece. A draft proposal. Barbara's next move. She had been planning to install surveillance cameras inside people's homes, for proper compliance monitoring. She had already ordered the equipment. She was days away from rolling it out. Just as Dad and I exchanged a horrified look, his phone rang. FBI. They wanted in. Barbara's scam wasn't limited to our neighborhood. She had been running similar operations across 3 states. Looking at the mountain of evidence stacked on Dad's desk, I thought about Sarah, standing in our garden, the Patels, tending their vegetables, the Rodriguez kids, scared in their own driveway. Barbara hadn't just broken the law. She had shattered our community's trust. And yet, as I read through the hundreds of resident statements, I realized something else. By standing up to her, we had become stronger than ever. The neighborhood unites. "You need to see this," my neighbor Tom whispered. He held up his phone, pressing play on shaky footage. My stomach turned. It was the Rodriguez family's birthday party. A month ago, in the video, the K-9 unit circled the kids' bounce house, barking aggressively. Children were crying. And in the background, Barbara, smirking, as if she were enjoying it. More neighbors gathered on our front lawn. Each brought their own evidence. Mrs. Patterson, the 80-year-old widow, showed us photos of security guards peering through her windows at night. The Patels held up a diary of daily harassment, fake violations, and thinly veiled threats. Mr. Patel's voice shook with rage. They said we grew too many tomatoes, that our curry cooking was a public nuisance. We've lived here for 20 years. And last month, they tried to make us feel like we didn't belong. Enough was enough. Dad's officers moved through the crowd, taking statements. And Barbara? She physically shrank with every new accusation. The fake security team stood handcuffed by the patrol cars. Their badges and weapons were laid out on the hood for evidence photos. The neighborhood group chat exploded with pictures, texts, and videos, proof of Barbara's reign of terror. The Jackson family had footage of the security team measuring their grass with rulers at 6 a.m. The Kowalskis pulled up emails where Barbara threatened to put a lien on their house for having a basketball hoop. The worst part? The hoop had been there for 15 years. The hidden truth. "Look at this," Dad said, his face grim. On his laptop, he pulled up a document. Barbara had been funneling money into a secret TAN account. $200. In just 6 months. I blinked. No wonder the community pool never got fixed. A news van pulled up. Barbara tried to hide her face, but her bright red power suit made her impossible to miss. As the news crew set up, more people arrived. It turned out, Barbara's goons hadn't just harassed our community. They had spread beyond our borders. The Martinez family, who lived 2 blocks away, brought security footage. In the video, Barbara's team tried to issue them citations. For what? Living in a neighborhood they didn't even control. They had even threatened to arrest a teenage boy for skateboarding suspiciously. Dad pulled me aside. His voice was dead serious. "This goes deeper than we thought." I swallowed. "How deep?" "These guys have warrants in 3 counties. They target power-hungry TAN presidents. Convince them to create special security teams, and then?" His expression darkened. "They case houses for robberies." Barbara had thought she was in control. But in reality, she had been their pawn. Justice is served. By sunset, our street looked like a block party. Except instead of music and food, we had police officers processing evidence, neighbors hugging and crying, news reporters broadcasting live. Sarah handed out cold drinks to everyone. The Rodriguez kids finally got to finish their birthday party. This time, with real police officers singing along. Barbara sat alone in the back of a patrol car. Her phone buzzed non-stop. Probably the real TAN board members, seeing themselves on the evening news. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and investigations. But tonight, for the first time in years, our neighborhood felt whole again. The aftermath. The next morning, our street was swarmed with news vans. The headline? TAN president arrested for running fake police operation. At the community meeting, residents came forward one by one. The Rodriguez family played footage of security guards terrorizing their kids. The Patels showed proof of bogus violation notices. The DA revealed the full extent of Barbara's crimes. The biggest shock? Barbara hadn't just hired fake cops. She had stolen over $200 in TAN funds. Money that should have fixed playgrounds, pools, and sidewalks. Instead, it had bought tactical gear. And that poor German shepherd. The real K-9 officer announced that the dog had been rescued. He would be rehabilitated. And maybe, just maybe, he would become a real police dog one day. The district attorney explained Barbara's fate. Fraud, impersonating law enforcement, intimidation, civil rights violations, up to 15 years in prison. Barbara tried to cut a deal. But the evidence was too strong. She had destroyed trust, and now, she would face justice. That night, our community held its first real TAN election. No more harassment, no more fake cops, no more fear. For the first time in years, people weren't afraid anymore. As Dad always said, real security isn't about badges or uniforms. It's about neighbors who look out for each other. The new homeowners council gathered in the community center, now unrecognizable from the days of Barbara's rule. Gone was her infamous wall of shame, once covered in violation notices, threats, and ridiculous fines. In its place, a vibrant collage of neighborhood events. Photos of families laughing at the block party. Snapshots of kids playing in the newly repaired playground. A picture of Mrs. Patterson watering her flowers, without fear. At the front of the room, Sarah stood confidently, leading her first meeting as council president. "For years, we lived under fear," she began, her voice clear and strong. "Now, we have a choice. We can use our budget for something better, community programs, neighborhood events, real improvements, no more security patrols, no more intimidation, just us, taking care of each other." A wave of applause swept through the room. Just last week, a documentary crew came to film our neighborhood's transformation. They interviewed residents, capturing the remarkable shift from a place ruled by fear to a thriving, united community. Their cameras rolled at our monthly block party, where Officer Rodriguez, a real police officer, played basketball with the kids. Parents grilled burgers and shared stories. Neighbors, once strangers, laughed and planned the next event together. The producer pulled me aside, shaking his head in amazement. "You know," he said, gesturing to the happy chaos around us, This isn't just a story about corruption or fake cops. It's a story about what happens when people stand up for each other. I looked around at Sarah, my dad, our neighbors, all the people who had once been afraid to step outside their doors. Now, they were building something real. A community. And for the first time in a long time, I knew Barbara had tried to control us. But in the end, she had only made us stronger.